All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Raluca. I am a web cartographer. So for those of you that are like, what the hell is that? I create interactive maps available on the web. And I know that you will think, oh, right, like Google Maps. So it's almost like that, but we don't only visualize like location, we also visualize all sorts of data, like for example, population density, or we create city visualizations where you can visualize the year of construction of a building or how tall a building is, etc. Like there are many data sets out there. And the purpose is that the user looks at these visualizations and can extract information like patterns from the data and can find maybe interesting results or interesting conclusions from that data. My official title, though, is not web cartographer, is a product engineer. I work for an American company called Esri, and we create a geospatial software. So basically software that helps you with geospatial analysis. We have this product called the ArcGIS API for JavaScript, which is our web mapping API that allows you to map 3D and 2D data. And in my daily job, I help with API releases. I write documentation for the API. I create samples, and I also do some testing. And a small part of my job is also building prototype apps, and I blog about them. So if by the end of the talk, you'll be like, I can do that, or I'd love to do that, then just come and talk to me, because we're also hiring. What kind of prototype apps I built? I recently worked on something called Manhattan Skyscraper Explorer, and I can show you a live version of it because it's much more exciting. So this is basically the app. I took the building data from Manhattan and I mapped the year of construction. You can see it here, for example, like this. You can see what are the buildings that are newly built. And in this timeline, each point is a building. So the height is on the y-axis. So here you can see, like, for example, buildings that are the highest. And if you click on that one or on a building, then you can get more information about the building. I used the Wikipedia API to get some information, like the first paragraph. And then with Flickr, I pulled up some images. Another app that I worked on, this is more like my free time project, actually. And it's just because I'm a James Bond fan, so I wanted to see where James Bond traveled in his movies. And I'm really sorry, but I don't have a live demo because it's all free time projects. You never finish them. But this is basically, like, you can get the idea. It's just visualizing where he was in his movies. And 4 years ago, I worked for the Swiss National Park. And my boss back then asked me, hey, could you create a 3D map of the park? And after like some tryings and some trying to figure out which web APIs would work for a 3D map, none of them were really cartographer friendly, so they didn't really look so good. So back then I had to tell my boss, no, I can't. And now that I'm working for this company that actually creates web 3D APIs, I was like, I could do that now, and I could do it quite fast. So another demo, live demo, is my hiking app that Martin also saw. It doesn't really do much. It shows you the hikes, and then let's say you can select like the difficult ones. And this is actually one that I did this weekend. It's called Macoon. I also pulled pictures from Flickr from people that went there. And you also have like this elevation profile that shows you how high each point on the hike is. And then I also, we have this feature, edge rendering for buildings. And I played around with that. So you can see like each building has the edges shown over there. And I played around with different styles, had some fun with building data for different cities, and try to visualize it in like unique ways, so to say. So my talk today is about how I build such apps and like what's the process of building them. Of course, everything starts with an idea, always. And then once you get the idea, you start searching for data. and you explore, like see what's out there. And if you find your data, then you go through this whole iterative process of sketching and coding and testing and sketching some more. And at some point you really have to say, okay, stop, this is enough, even though probably you will never think that the app is finished, and just deploy it and blog about it and share it. So this is like the general process. And let's talk about each one of them in detail. The idea is mostly a question. So for the Manhattan app, I've never been to New York, so I was like, okay, buying a flight to New York is probably more expensive than building this app, so I decided to build the app. And it was like super interesting. The moment I built the timeline and I could actually see all the buildings there, I just started clicking through the tallest one of them and just learning about them. So that was like my motivation for that app. For the hiking app, it was more like I was really frustrated that I couldn't make that map for my boss 5 years ago. So I was like, okay, now I'm going to do it. And James Bond, again, it's like a curiosity, like just for me. But you could also like read articles in newspapers and think like, okay, is there data to actually prove that what they're saying here is right? Or you could see a nice 2D map and think, could I actually build this in 3D? That's more or less how it works for me. And then once I get my idea, I start searching for data. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the open data concept, but it's pretty cool because nowadays almost every city and government has an open data portal. And you can just Google open data and the location you're interested in, and you will probably find, like, if it's a developed city or if the government decided to put their data online, you will find a geoportal. And that's where I mostly get like the data for my apps. And then there's also like Wikipedia or different websites for geodata. It's like Natural Earth. There's plenty of resources out there. Once you find your data, the format is mostly shapefile for geodata. It's shapefile, geopackage, a geodatabase. But these are not formats that you can actually they are not readable by the browser. So if your data is quite small, you could convert it to GeoJSON using ArcGIS Pro or QGIS or whatever mapping software you prefer to use. Or in the Esri world, we have the so-called ArcGIS REST services, and it's just a REST API that you can then use to plug in your data in your app. And then the fun begins. Once you've got your data, you're like, okay, how do I visualize it? And for me, it's the point where I put my laptop aside and I just go to pen and paper, or I don't know, for you a drawing tablet or whatever, whatever you prefer most. I do this, I've tried mockup tools, but they somehow don't work for me because I have the feeling there's like this layer between what I want to show and like the creative process. So I try to like put technology aside and just go wild there with my pen and paper. And this is the mockups that I created for the hiking app. On the left, it's the one that I have for James Bond, and then those are two apps that I actually never worked on. So now let me talk to you about my stack. I always wanted to say this, the cartographer's web stack. It's just client-side because the REST API basically takes like the backend for me. And for the mapping, I use the ArcGIS API for JavaScript, as I told you. What I like about it is that it's really high level, so I don't know WebGL, and the only time I tried to learn it, my mind was blown, so I kind of like, okay, I'm just going to stick to the API. And you also don't need to know anything about shaders. It's useful to know a few computer graphics concepts if you do 3D, but you can also use the API for 2D mapping. Then for the charts and graphics, if I have something custom, like the timeline here, I use D3, then I can really customize it as I want. But for the elevation profile, for example, it's just a standard graph, so then I just go to some charting library. I chose AM charts for that one. Then the UI, it's again a thing, if it's a simple UI, then I just do vanilla JS or vanilla TypeScript more recently. I tried Angular, but it was just such a huge framework, and as you could see, like my apps are mostly just the view part. I don't need routing, I don't need authentication. So I used it for one project, and then I was like, okay, I'm good now. I switched to React. And I'm getting along quite well with it. There are pretty good tutorials out there. And other tools, build systems are a cartographer's nightmare. I literally spent like days trying to set everything up. And then I was super happy when it worked though. So I use Webpack just because the cool kids use Webpack. But I find it super useful afterwards when you have it set up. Then it's really easy to work, and it makes your development much better. TypeScript, again, is something that I've switched to recently, and I really like it. I've started learning programming with JavaScript, and I was the type of person that would be like, if 2 is a string and I compare it to 2, a number, that should be the same thing, right? Like, it's no problem. And I found TypeScript makes things so much cleaner and structured, and I like the fact that I could use like the latest features. And for deployment, I usually use GitHub pages. It's just easy, and you have your code there, and then you can just create the live version of your app. And this is like the slide that doesn't really say much, but this is where I actually spend most of my time when I work on these apps. It's a mixture of coding and testing and coding and a lot of chocolate and sweets, and you like get frustrated, it's not working, and you eat more chocolate, and then all of a sudden you feel better. An important part is also getting feedback, and I usually always bug my colleagues, wait, what do you think about this? And the final judge, though, is my mom always, because I shouldn't be saying this because it might sound like an insult nowadays, but she's not a very technical person. So when I showed to her an app, and she's like, oh, that was so interesting how you could do this and that and so on, I'm like, yes, that worked. And then if she's like, I don't understand this, then I'm like, okay, I need to work a bit more on this. And then at some point, I just decided to say, okay, that was it. It's a good app. I'm just going to deploy it. I'm going to write a blog post, share it with everyone, and be happy. And that's my talk.